Hey, welcome to episode 48 of Dream 10X. It's your boy, JC.
I am Dr. Capel. Welcome to my studio.
Here we are outside enjoying the warmth. It's awesome to have warm sunshine finally. It's been a cold winter. So we're in the backyard, and we are here today to talk about the book On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about a little thing I read in a newsletter that we get, or Cindy gets, and she lets me read every now and then. It's called The Bottom Line. It's got all kinds of random information in it, but it's really valuable. It's got some good stuff in it. And one of the things they say in here, what is this about, actually?
The whole bottom line?
No. Well, do you know what the whole thing is? It's not about anything in particular.
No, it's not. It's just useful bits of information, anything from finances to health to reading and strategies, neuroscience. It's really cool. My dad gets it for us for Christmas every year, and a subscription, and it's all kinds of helpful tips for living.
Yeah, and a little short reading, so you can just, while you're drinking
read it
coffee.
on the toilet.
Yeah. I wasn't going to say that, but... so this one is 5 things you can do to keep your brain sharp. And number 4 that they had, and I like these 5 listicles, as you could tell. 5 things that you do to improve your life. Crazy. But read more. It says read more. Research conducted by Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center at Chicago's Rush University Medical Center linked lifelong reading with a reduced risk for future cognitive decline, possibly by facilitating the creation of new neural connections. Mm-hmm. Reading is a wonderful way to engage our brains in creative thought, exploration, planning, and problem solving. So that's a great admonishment for how powerful reading is. But it further states that, remember how we talked about different ways we learn, whether it's auditory, books on tape, books on Audible versus, or reading on paper, or reading electronically. This says that you actually get more out of reading paper than you do any other inputs.
Interesting.
It says now 1/3 of Americans read a combination of ebooks and paper books, according to Pew Research Center. But reading on electronic devices just isn't the same. It can cause eye strain, and a 2022 scientific report study found that it creates an overactive environment in the brain that reduces reading comprehension.
That makes perfect sense. Too much sensory input.
Yeah. I don't.
And you get the tactile experience with this, which is changes how you learn.
Right. And I don't know if that research is correct or not, but based on my own feeling about reading, that's exactly how I feel. Like I get more out of paper reading than I do anything else. Mm-hmm. So the book On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins, written by Sandra Blakesley. I think she probably... he told her what to write and she wrote it or something like that. I don't know, but the two of those collaborated on this book.
Somehow, some way.
So I just wanted to share my top 5 takeaways from this book. So who is Jeff Hawkins? Have you heard of a Palm Pilot?
Yes, I have.
It was a great little technology when it came out. It was a lot of fun. And I actually, professionally, I worked on Palm Pilots for a year or 2.
That's really cool.
And if you recall, we had Dave Renson on our podcast, one of the earlier podcasts. I don't remember the number exactly, but go search for Dave Renson. He started a company. He was a co-founder of a company that I worked for, and our focus was on enterprise hot sinks for Palm Pilots.
What does that mean to the non-techie?
So Palm Pilots, you remember you had to put them in a cradle, and you could sync data with your desktop, and calendars and to-dos and all that stuff.
So everything like Google does automatically now?
Yeah, we take that stuff for granted, but back in the day, it was revolutionary.
Yeah.
Exchanging data with a mobile device in your desktop. But we were trying to take that one step further, where you could use it in the enterprise wirelessly to sync data from your mobile device to the enterprise.
Way ahead of its time.
Way ahead of its time then,
pretty amazing.
That's one of the reasons that company did so well.
Yeah.
But now we take that stuff for granted.
Yeah.
Like we didn't even have really wireless ability to send data from a mobile device yet, and that was like a burgeoning technology at the time. And now it's ubiquitous.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway,
cool.
Jeff Hawkins and his coworkers founded Palm, and they co-invented the Palm Pilot. and in many of its iterations, and it was such a tumultuous company history there. I was trying to follow it all, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. They got bought by U.S. Robotics and then HP, and kind of complicated. So I was trying to figure out what Jeff's net worth is, because I want to see these big business names.
Yeah.
How much money I feel kind of guilty about that, but I'm interested. How much money are they worth? Can't find much on him. So
Really?
I did find that he dropped off the billionaire list in 2001. So he left. They got frustrated with how Palm was being run, and they left and started Handspring. And I think somewhere he was making a lot of money at the time, but then when he went to Handspring, things kind of fell apart, and he dropped off the billionaire list. I'm sure he's still a multimillionaire, but I can't verify any of that. So anyway, that's kind of who Jeff Hawkins is. Apparently, he's always been interested in neuroscience. And so that's been his real life's passion. And so since leaving all of that stuff behind, the mobile device world, he's got into trying to figure out how the brain works, with the sole primary purpose of duplicating how the brain works in computing technology. He wants to build he wants to figure out how to build intelligent machines.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the genesis of this book, is his desire to learn more about how the brain works and to how to codify intelligence in silicone and software, I guess, is one way to put it. So it was fascinating to learn that about him, because obviously I'm aware of Palm and Handspring, but I didn't know of his interest in neuroscience. So, and that's kind of, we're kind of moving in that direction too.
Yeah.
So really fascinating. So he's got a company now called Numenta, and that's what they do, primarily research. They try to put together intellectual property around this whole concept of how to build an intelligent machine. He also founded a nonprofit called the Redwood Center for Theoretical Neuroscience, but he did that back in 2002. Oh, he came out with a new book last year I want to read. It's called 1,000 Brains, A New Theory of Intelligence.
That sounds fun.
So maybe it just throws everything that was written in this book out the window and evolves it. But anyway, we're talking about this book today. So a lot of fascinating stuff. I was reading this, and a real page turner about halfway through, and then I got lost.
Yeah.
When it started getting deep into the consciousness and creativity and all that, I admittedly got lost. But the first half of it, just fascinating. So I don't know I haven't studied the brain at all. Didn't know anything about it, and so to start hearing about stuff like the triune brain fascinated me, is that the reptilian brain is the core.
Yeah,
that's the first evolution of our brains as species, and then on top of that you get the mammalian brain.
Yeah.
And the mammalian brain was primarily concerned with feelings, emotions, and stuff like that. And then my understanding is the evolution of the cortex started with the what is that thing called? The hippocampus. So the hippocampus became the root of our cortex.
The thinking brain.
The thinking brain. And so what was really fascinating to me is I loved evolution in college. And one of the things that really stuck with me was the phrase ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny.
What does that mean?
And that's the recapitulation theory that, as we grow in the womb, the shapes that we take as an embryo to an adult recapitulates all the adult forms in our evolutionary past that we evolved into our current form.
So we go through the fins and the tails and the
we
gills
have tails and all of that stuff.
I want my tail back.
As a growing embryo. And that's kind of how our brain is formed as well, has formed over time. So we started off with the reptilian brain, which is responsible for the fight or flight, strong responses in us. And then on top of that, the mammalian, warm-blooded. I don't know the correlation between being warm-blooded and that type of feelings and stuff like that in our mammalian brain. I don't know the correlation there, but from that, our cortex evolves. So you got basically these three core components of our brain that recapitulate the history of our evolution. That blew me away.
Fascinating, yeah.
Blew me away. And I'm tying that together. Maybe that's incorrect from a biology standpoint, but it seemed like a correlation that I could make there. The recapitulation theory with our triune brain. I don't know if that's right or not. Sounds good to me, and it was really interesting to think about how our brain is put together, because I don't know all the different. I'm just talking at high level understanding of the brain. I don't know all the different, the hippocampus and the cerebellum, and I don't know all that stuff. Okay, so that was number 2, the triune brain. Number 3 is just what the neocortex is. So Jeff points out in his book that he's focused primarily on the neocortex, or the cortex. And the reason being is that the cortex is what makes us who we are. It's the thinking part of our brain. Go ahead.
No. I was looking for recapitulation in my fancy dancy medical neuroscience book.
Is that in there?
That's
yeah, it's probably totally erroneous there, but I just thought it was interesting. There might be a correlation there. But anyway, okay, so the neocortex, what is it? So I thought our brains were like a big solid thing, but apparently the neocortex. So I have 6 playing cards. He says six regular cards. He says the neocortex is about the thickness of 6 cards stacked on one another, and that's roughly 2 millimeters thick, apparently. So that's how thick our cortex is, and it's about, if you take the cortex out and you flatten it out, it's about the size of a napkin, a large dinner napkin. So it's that size and it's this thickness. That's really pretty small. Interesting.
Yeah, and it does all the things.
And that's what makes us so smart, apparently. And the brain, and that napkin, that dinner napkin. It's bigger than our skull, so it has to be folded and kind of crammed in there. And just there's a lot of things that are fascinating about that aspect of it too. That our brains are evolving so quickly, over the span of time. That we have to fold that material in our skull. Our skull is not able to grow as fast as that material.
Yeah.
In fact, he points out that women's pelvises have had to widen over time to accommodate the larger skulls that were evolving. But so who knows if we go out. I was thinking about my son Matthew when he was born, and he just had this giant head. I just remember That's how funny. Big his head was. It just seemed. So we are.
The poor birth mother.
But and I don't know if he's like a step in evolution where he's got a bigger.
He's still got a big head.
He's a pretty big head, yeah.
But his body's grown into it, so
Anyway, evolution in the brain and the neocortex. So 2 millimeters thick here, and each of these layers, so there are 6 layers actually. So if you can think of each one of these cards as a layer in our cortex, and we do have 6 layers in our cortex, and I think what those layers do is not really clear, and that was what he tries to talk about he talks about in the second half of the book. But I was kind of confused. But apparently, data comes in from various sensors or whatever, and flows up and down those 6 layers and horizontally as well, and that's how we make sense of it. Make sense of things. He says there's around 30 billion neurons in the whole cortex. 30 billion neurons, and that they're so tightly packed in here. And each, if you were to look at the cortex side on, there's just so many cells in there that they can't even count them right now, even I guess at electron microscope level. They're just so densely packed in there.
Yeah.
It's also a Scientific American article by Francis Crick, who wrote an article called "The Astonishing Hypothesis," which also says the same thing. That and I think I didn't write the date down, for that article. But Crick says the same thing, that our mind and who we are is basically embodied in cells.
Yeah.
In our brain.
That's true. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it is hard to think about.
So, I mean, when you get back to consciousness, that is an interesting factor. So.
Right. So my number 4 is 4 key takeaway here was about using a metaphor of software, the software that runs our brain. According to what was presented in this book, it's all the same software. So you got eyeballs with some kind of connectivity running into your cortex. You got ears running into your cortex. You got a nose running into your cortex. All these sensors are coming into your cortex, and your cortex is deciphering what that data is and interpreting it. And it's highly complicated data. Like when you think of vision, he talks about how the eyes do a saccade. It's called a saccade, and it's something like they jitter like 3 times a second or something like that. So you're not getting a steady stream of visual input into your eye.
And it's upside down.
You're getting all kinds of like jittery visual data that's coming in. But
which is why, like, you see something out of the corner of your eye, like your brain interprets it as something.
So also with that, all the sensory data coming in, Jeff points out that there's really only one piece of software though running all of that. Like, so I guess I intuited without studying any of this that different regions of the brain would have different way of handling the data that's coming in, right? Like you got some part of your brain that knows how to handle visual data, and some part that knows how to handle audio data coming in. That seems to make logical sense, that there would be specializations in your brain for that type of thing. Apparently that's not the case. It's just a general operating machine, and it's a pattern recognition machine, generally speaking.
And based on what we teach it to understand, then that's the neural pathway that evolves. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's this guy, Vernon Mountcastle.
Daredevil! The real Daredevil!
What?
The comic book character Daredevil?
What does that have to do with Vernon Mountcastle?
That's the guy you're going to talk about who's blind,
No!
Right? Never mind! Just kidding! We're not to Daredevil yet.
Vernon Mountcastle was a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins University.
Not Daredevil.
And he wrote a paper in 1978 called An Organizing Principle for Cerebral Function. And he basically proposed that the cortex uses the same computational tool to accomplish everything it does.
Now we're to Daredevil?
No, Daredevil. And so this is fundamentally important, I think, in trying to learn how to build an intelligent machine. Because that means you don't need separate computing modules for sight and hearing and all that. You should be, I mean, if you successfully model the brain, you've just got one computing platform that knows how to do it all. It knows how to interpret the data based on the type of data it is. And this was exemplified by recent experiments where blind people were able to see by having electrical stimulus on their tongue.
Now we're to Daredevil.
Dang it!
So talk about that study, because that's really cool.
Yeah, so I read about it in the book, but I couldn't find it again. But a Google search popped up a couple of different things. There was an example of a mountain climber in Colorado who lost his sight through reticular degeneration, and he was able to use a tool, I guess, that you could strap onto his forehead, and it had an electrical stimulus on his tongue that would take the visual input from what was on his head and apply electrical stimulus to his tongue, and it would allow him to get some general picture in his brain of what was in front of him. So that means that the taste part of the brain was getting visual data from this sensor and knew it was visual data and was interpreting it accordingly, even though it was born to always work with taste in the phone.
Yeah.
So I think that
So it
experiment right
remapped
there,
the neural network, or remapped the neural pathway.
I don't know about that,
Yeah.
but it does seem to indicate that the Cortex, it doesn't care what kind of data it gets, but it knows what kind of data it gets and knows how to interpret it. And
That's a hell of an evolution.
That's awesome. I mean, that is a really, really, really interesting discovery there.
So so how would you build that from a computer science perspective?
I don't know. Okay, so that was the fourth point. The fifth point is that my card's here. So in this Cortex, you've got these 6 layers, right? And it's just packed with what they call cortical columns. So up and down these cortical columns that go across that go vertically through this stack of cards that process data, and they're packed together in there. And I can't explain what exactly they do, but from a high level, apparently there are these cortical columns in there. Data flows up and down the cortical columns. The general structure in your cortex is what's responsible for our intelligence. And it kind of reminded me of the OSI networking model.
What's that?
And again, I'm making a correlation that may be totally erroneous, but in computer networking, there's a
What's
model.
computer networking?
Well, how you connect computers over a network.
Okay.
So this computer is talking to a Wi-Fi router that talks to Verizon, that talks to the internet, whatever.
So it's the whole system.
Yeah.
Okay.
How computers talk to one another on the network, and there's an abstraction, a level of abstraction to kind of describe and explain how that communication happens, so that all the different types of computers, different types and operating systems and all that, they all speak the same language. And okay, sorry about that. Our computer did not survive the elements and overheated and shut down while we were recording. So we decided to come back into our home kitchen studio here, which is where we usually do our podcast from.
And now I have coffee, so I'm highly energized. Woohoo!
Yeah, so also in her coffee, you put cayenne pepper in your coffee. That's so weird.
So it's called like a spicy mocha. So you do like regular unsweetened cocoa, like a tablespoon, and then cayenne pepper, how spicy you want it, and a little bit of milk, and it is awesome. I wouldn't want it in the morning, but it's perfect for like an afternoon.
That's gross.
Tingling of your taste buds.
Does it help you see?
It does, because I am Daredevil.
Oh my gosh. So just wanted to finally wrap up the point that I was trying to make about cortical columns and how I thought that it kind of looked like how the cortical columns work with data flowing up and down and horizontally. Kind of reminded me of the network OSI model, which has 7 layers to it. But interestingly enough, like the bottom layer of the 7-layer OSI model is physical. It represents physical connectivity. So if you plug in an RJ45 Ethernet cable, that's your physical connection. You could say that your eyeball connecting to your cortex is that physical connection. And then the other 6 layers of the cortex could kind of map to the OSI model.
That's interesting. That's an interesting connection.
So the way I remember the OSI model is the saying, please do not touch Superman's private area. So the P is the physical. And you got the data, and then the network, and session, presentation, application. What's all man?
What if I want to touch his private area?
No, you don't, unless I'm Superman. Anyway, that totally didn't go right. But OSI model, I thought, could be apropos to kind of explaining the cortical columns and how they work. Because there's 6 layers of the cortical columns. So, there were the 6 layers of those cards. So each one of those represents a layer in the cortical column in the cortex. I don't know. Maybe I'm full of crap. I just thought
Makes sense.
There could be an interesting correlation there in terms of, computing and making an intelligent machine and how our brains actually work. So I don't know, just something I thought about. So that was those are the 5 top takeaways that I had, but there's a lot of other things. He also says the capacity of the human neocortex may turn out to be relatively modest some decades from now. This book was written in 2002 or 2004. I don't know. I mean, one of the did we talk about prediction?
No, we didn't.
We didn't. Well, shoot, that should have been one of my points.
Well,
he points out that one of the key aspects of the neocortex is its predictive capabilities. And when you think in terms of evolution, being able to predict outcomes is essential to survival, human survival.
Well, and it's why we are on the defensive all the time as humans, because everything triggers our amygdala, and so for example, you have a meeting with your supervisor. Your supervisor says, we need to talk, or I need to call you into my office. We immediately go into fight or flight mode because that's survival mode, and predictivity says that we're going to get in trouble for whatever reason. And so it's like de-stressing and trying to be emotionally intelligent enough to recognize when that's happening. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. And then in our ancestors, they had to be able to predict when the weather was changing, or when the flowers are coming out, or when that saber-toothed tiger was going to take you, and what that looked like in your environment. So all the sensory input that we're learning constantly that now we've shut down, I mean, it all cycles back to where society's bad.
Yeah, well... when you think about, there's just so much there to think about. Predictive capabilities of the neocortex, and think about Stonehenge.
Oh yeah.
The reason Stonehenge exists is so humans could predict the weather patterns and when to farm and when to start farming and when to start planting and all that stuff. That's just, it's survival.
Yeah.
And
everything was down to it.
You think about our ancestors, our evolutionary ancestors, we didn't have all this technology and calendars and, internet, and we had to actually look up at the sky and see the stars. And
now we can't even see the sky.
And understand what those movements meant and how we could understand those movements to predict the future.
Yeah.
And how that prediction could impact our survival. And then finally, he's got one quote that I noted about entrepreneurship. One of the keys to entrepreneurial success is that you must jump headfirst into a new field before it is 100% clear to you that you'll be successful. Timing is important. I just thought that was a good quote. So in conclusion thoughts, Jeff focuses on the neocortex, or on the cortex, as being the central part of the brain that is necessary to duplicate in order to create an intelligent machine. I have to say that, I'm not a neuroscientist. I just started reading about neuroscience and brains and stuff. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, just at a fundamental level. Just based on how our brain has evolved over millions of years, and all of the stuff that's happened to us as humans over all of that time, learning how to fight the saber-toothed tiger, learning how to hunt buffalo, surviving the winters, and learning to plant, and all of that stuff. All of that has gone and has been baked into our brain, starting with the amygdala on up into the mammalian brain, and we're constantly evolving our cortex. How do you disregard all of that history to create an intelligent machine? To me, logically, I'm not sure that I agree with that.
Yeah.
I would want to. One thing that's absent from here, another thing that seems to be absent from consideration in this book is laughter and joy. Sadness and empathy, and all of those feelings. And I guess those are in the mammalian brain. Those come from the mammalian brain.
But how do you teach a computer to have feelings?
But how do you disregard that? Is my point. I don't know how you I don't know how you teach it, but how do you disregard it to create a human-like computer? I don't know. I mean, why would you want to?
Because empathy can change how you would react.
Exactly.
In a situation.
And those feelings have also been key to our success as a species.
Yep.
Having empathy for people and
also
love,
humans are made to be social. Humans are made to live in teams, but computers are not.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I guess they are with the networking capabilities, but they can be their own
Right.
individual system and be totally okay. Whereas humans,
Right.
like you go a little nutso.
Not me, but I guess others.
You're around me all day. How could you not be nutso?
What?
You're around me all day. How could you not be nutso?
So those are my concluding remarks. I wanted to find out what you're reading. Tell us what you're reading.
Oh gosh, so for when I'm walking the dog or driving the car, I'm reading listening to.
Wait, yeah. Let's clarify.
The Adam Grant's Think Again. I'm blanking on the name. It's really, really good. As well as Brandon Sanderson's series, really good also.
Series of what?
The Stormlight series.
What is it, a story?
It's a fantasy novel.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
fantasy series. Okay. It's really good. I definitely recommend it. And then I'm working on a couple of neuroscience classes, and this is one that we just started, and it's the diving bell and the butterfly. Fascinating. So this guy had a stroke, and he was, I forget the name of the disease, but you're trapped in your body. So you're totally conscious, but you're trapped in your body. And typically with this situation, you can still move your eyelid. So a translator came in, realized this was happening, and then he wrote a book, one letter at a time, with somebody going through the French alphabet, and when he got to that letter, writing it down, he wrote this entire book.
But how would he communicate the letter?
So he would move his eyelid, and so
Which did what?
he would just move his eyelid. So that I would be I'd start saying the alphabet.
Oh, okay, I got
So
you.
she would say A, B, C, D. When you get to D, you'd blink your eye. And so he wrote the whole book like that. So incredible patience between the writer and the guy. But it's apparently what he's going through and being trapped in his body, what that's like. And from my understanding, because I haven't finished it yet, I just started it, the integration between time is wildly different. Because for him, 5 years ago was the same as today because the way his brain is now working. Because time is one of our sensory inputs, time and space.
Right.
Now,
And that's one of the key things I took from this.
Yeah.
Time is an important, what you said.
Yeah, and now his sensory inputs are gone. So the way that his mind works is wildly different.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm so excited to get into it more. So yeah, started this, and then also Dead Anchored. It's this is about neuroscience and the polyvagal theory, and how our vagus nerve actually completely transforms our brain and how we can interact with it with more intention to either calm or whatever we need to do to get in a good headspace and move forward. So I just started this one. How to befriend your nervous system.
That gets back to the point, how do you just focus on the cortex when all of that, the nervous system, your gut, all of this stuff is central to who we actually are.
And that's why the deep breathing is
what do I know?
That's why with the mindfulness and meditation, why the deep breathing is so powerful, because 3 deep breaths immediately trigger the vagus nerve, which triggers your rest and restore systems, saying, I'm not a threat. This is not a threat. I can relax. So it's really cool. So that's more about that. Play, I just started this one as well, and it's really how to bring more play and joy into
You're
our
not
work.
ADHD at all, are you?
Yeah, I literally okay, which one do I want to read now? What am I in the mood for? And I'll read it for a little bit and I'll switch. Sometimes I'll stick with one. It's whatever I'm in the mood for, right? And then this most epic series. I'm almost done with this. I am in the last quarter. So freaking good. And then there's 2 more by Paul Zier. So this is Becoming Batman, and he literally goes through neuroscience, physics, health, on how an average person could actually become the Batman. So freaking cool.
I want to read that one, the Iron Man one.
Yeah, and so this one I'm reading next, which is Captain America, which is, again, kind of the same thing. And all the science that's out there to really change somebody's DNA and transform them into Captain America. And it's all real, he actually goes through medical science and real life science it's so cool.
That's good.
And then the last one is Inventing Iron Man, and that's more along this line with the artificial intelligence that you're and machine learning.
That's awesome.
So when we finish that series, we're going to do a podcast on it because it's freaking awesome.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yep.
I don't know how you read multiple books at once.
I don't know how you only read one at a time.
I can only do one thing at a time.
I got a slow processor. I have a small neocortex.
That's what she said.
And on that note, thanks for watching.
Bye.